Hello and welcome to this week's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide advice and share knowledge amongst business owners. If you would like to keep up to date on our latest webinars, please make sure you follow us on SlideShare or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also access all of our resources for business owners by downloading the BizSmart app. Our host joining me today is BizSmart founder Kevin Brent. Kevin at BizSmart has helped hundreds of businesses work out the steps they need to take to grow their business in a successful and sustainable way. Thank you, Kevin. Over to you.
Thank you, Caroline. Okay, so what we're going to do this time is to take a look at something that we call our cookbook. So it's not actually to do with recipes, but the reason it's called a cookbook is that it's a little bit like a recipe for your business, certainly for your marketing and your lead generation activities. And we know from before that businesses that manage to scale up successfully get very good at executing their plans consistently and effectively. And one of the things that a lot of small business owners don't manage to get to grips with very well is that lead generation process. It tends to be fits and starts. So when we're busy, maybe things tail off a little bit, and then we suddenly realize actually we've got to try and get a few more leads in, so we spend a bit of effort and we go up and down, have peaks and troughs. So what we're trying to do here is to make sure that we identify the tactics and the behaviours, but in this particular webinar is particularly about the behaviours that we want to be doing every month so that we have a consistent stream of leads coming in. So a little bit of a recap from some of the other webinars that we've done before. So if we look at this in the context of a marketing plan, if you like, from the top where we're identifying what our value proposition is, then we took a look at a lead generation framework to help us to identify a few of the tactics, activities that we might do in terms of generating the leads, and I'll show that framework just in a minute as well. Then we actually took one of those in particular and made that into more of a process. Now we're looking at this cookbook that I'm talking about, and the final step would be to look at the budget to make sure we've got a budget for a marketing plan so that we can not only control the expenditure on it, but actually also look at the effectiveness of it in terms of return on investment. So we're going to look at that behaviours cookbook now. So this is what we looked at from a framework point of view for generating or looking at what lead activities we're going to do to generate those leads. And there is another webinar on this, and certainly we can send out the link back to that before. But any good lead generation plan is going to have a combination of activities, a bit of a mix of activities. And this matrix just helps us to think about what are we going to do with our existing customers and our new customers. If you look across the top, so what activities we're going to do with those, but also looking horizontally for each of those existing and new customers, what are our targeted activities, we might call them, when we go out hunting, get people in our sites, and much more specific direct action, what are our farming activities. So you can use this framework just to build up a list of things, and that's what we've got here on this slide at the minute. Then the trick to do was to go down and say, okay, well, which few of these things, ideally which one in each box, but often we get maybe one or two things, if we did consistently well to the best of our abilities, would have the most impact on generating the lead. So we just shortlisted a little bit here. And then one of the things that we did last time around was we took a targeted mail campaign. We said, okay, well that's one that we want to break out a little bit more to define, okay, well, what does that targeted mail campaign look like in terms of a process? So we then said, okay, let's make it into a process. So the first would be to identify and agree the next prospect we're going to mail, then we're going to mail them, then we're going to do a telephone follow-up, and then we're going to do a sales meeting if interested. So it goes into our sales funnel, into our sales process. And the other things below that are just a little bit more detail on the aims, how we're going to do it, when we're going to do it, that kind of thing, and some metrics at the bottom. So but the point there is that we took one of those activities that we felt we needed to put a bit more detail on, and we started to then detail some of the steps in the process, which is getting towards some of our behaviours, and that's the next step, is this cookbook. So what we're trying to do with this cookbook, and this might look a little bit complex at first glance, but I'll talk you through it. It's actually not very difficult at all, because at its simplest, what we're trying to do with the cookbook is say, well, if those are the things that's to take the targeted mail campaign, if that's what we think is going to make the biggest difference, what are the things that I, or whoever it is that is doing the lead generation side of things for that, need to do each month consistently? When do they need to do them by? So for that targeted email process, we've already broken that out a little bit. So that would be easy to populate in here. But for some of those other activities, they maybe didn't warrant spending a lot of time developing a full process for it, but there are still things that we want to be doing every month, or whoever it is that is responsible for doing that, we want to be able to do every month. So let me just talk you through this framework a little bit. So the first thing to note is that we're doing this monthly, as I've said. It might be that we're going to look at it every month, and it might be that the bulk of the things stay the same every month, but we will certainly want to log where we got in terms of whether we actually did it or not. And that's a key point here, because if we don't get the leads in that we were expecting in a month, we need to be able to know whether it's because we didn't do the activities that we said, or if you've got a member of staff doing it, that they didn't do the activities, or whether it was because they did do the activities, but something didn't work as we thought it would be. Maybe they aren't doing it quite well enough, so maybe there's an education thing, or maybe actually it was a new process or a new activity that we were doing. Maybe it just simply isn't giving the results that we would have expected to do. So we need to be able to look at that and actually identify where the issue would be if we're not getting the leads that we want. The next thing that you can see here, if you think back to that framework that I just took you through very briefly about existing and new customers and the hunting and farming activities, all that we've done here simply is just to reproduce that in a slightly different layout. So it's nothing new that we're looking at here. We've still got some lines that are about existing customers, some lines that are about new customers, and we split those between farming and the hunting activities. So nothing complex. We've just taken that 4 boxes and we've just slightly rearranged them here to look at. And then if we look across the top here, then this is where it's going to provide us that way to define the behaviours that we want in order to deliver on those lead generation activities. But as I said, also to track those key performance indicators. And they're the leading ones. There was a previous webinar we did on leading and lagging key performance indicators. The leading ones are behaviours that we would do in advance of the results that we would expect. The lagging ones are the results that we would expect. So it's no good saying, well, we wanted to get 10 new leads in. Well, that's a result. Looking at that after and saying, well, we got 9, that doesn't help us. But if we know that actually we need to make X number of phone calls, go to X number of network meetings, get X number of business cards and whatever, those are the leading behaviours that we can track and make sure we're doing those each month. So let's just take a bit of an example and just work you through it. So you can start where you like on the template. I just happen to have started at the bottom with that targeted mail campaign process that we'd already started to identify. So we're simply listing some of those things here. Identify and agree the next prospects, mail and telephone follow-up, as we did on that process that I've also just sort of copied and pasted and reproduced here as well for you. So our behaviours might well be to identify and agree the next given prospects, mail them, follow them up with a call, just as I say we defined before. We can fill in our aims here because it's certainly important that we know why we're doing each one of these things. So the reason that we're identifying and targeting and agreeing the next prospect is we want to have a target group for it. We're mailing to arrange the interest, and then we're doing that telephone follow-up because we want to try and then arrange a face-to-face call. But for each of the lines that you're going to complete in here, you want to make it clear what the aims are, so you know why you're doing the particular activities. And then we want to set some leading key performance indicators, which again in this example we set in our lead generation process. But now we've set the target, if you like, we can then actually, did we do these at the end of the month? So did we identify and agree 20 new prospects at the beginning of the month? Did we mail all 20? Did we telephone, follow up them all? How many actual meetings did we get as a result of that? So if we thought we were going to get the 10% conversion rate, or at least conversion rate from the telephone follow-up to meeting, did that happen, or did we get more or less than that? And that would start to give us a clue as to where we might need to focus some attention. So that's that part of it. And that's where we can then track those outcomes, the actual that we got. And then what we're looking for tracking here is then the actual outcome. What are we hoping to get as a result of doing this? How many new leads are we trying to get, for example? So for that particular process, that hunting activity, the target email process, there's our aims, there's our actual behaviours that we're going to do. We've got our leading and our lagging key performance indicators for that. So that's an example where we've already spelt out the process, as we did in that early example with the targeted mail campaign. Let's take an example where we haven't perhaps do it. So one of the farming activities to existing customers, where we might not break it out in the same detail that we've done for a hunting activity. And what we said we would do in that earlier example, one of the things we said we would do is that we would create a useful blog. That was one of the tactics that we came up with, a blog that's useful to our audience, and that we would coordinate that in several ways across 4 of the boxes. So there's how we filled in for that farming activity. It's a monthly blog. The aim of doing it was to create useful content to nurture and engage with clients and to build a useful resource as well that we've then got perhaps on the website. How are we going to do that? So what are the behaviours that whoever is responsible for the monthly blog needs to do? Well, they're going to agree, say what the topic might be on the 3rd Friday of the month, prepare a draft by the 4th Friday, and then they're going to send it out on the 1st Friday. There might be a few other things you might put in there about when it goes on the website and things like that, but just to illustrate what that might be. Then you could do the same with farming activities for new customers. So again, if we're talking about the SEO here, or the blog activities, or the networking activities, then we've said what the aims are for each of those, and we've done a couple of leading behaviours for what those should be, and then we've identified what the key performance indicators are for the leading behaviours and why we're trying to do it. So that's a quick whiz through. It might look a little bit complicated here, but as I say, I think if you follow it through in the way that I've done, then really at the end of the day, it's just a slightly different way of presenting what could otherwise be done as a list. You could do it as a flow chart, or you could do it as a list. But the point is that you are identifying, once you've identified the key activities, you don't just say, well, yes, we're going to do a blog every month. You actually say what you're going to do within the month to make sure that that blog does get produced, it does go to the right place. So you're trying to make sure that you do the activity, in this case the blog, as well as you could do it and as consistently as you could do it. So you've made yourself a bit of a process. And finally, there's one for some hunting activities, which might be hunting activities with existing customers, which might include an end of project review, an annual review, feedback survey, and then some things that we would do to be able to track that. So note that the section that I've highlighted here in the slightly pinky colour, that is the key section. That is that list of behaviours along with the measures that we are going to do every month. So I mentioned before that the next step is the marketing budget, because all of these activities will take time, certainly, to do, and in some cases they will take cash to do. So the whole reason that we're doing this is we want to really be able to identify which activities are worth spending our time on, rather than just either spending money or time or both in doing activities that we don't necessarily know are leading to the results we want, in this case the number of leads that come in. So there is that old well-known saying, I'm sure you come across from a chap called John Wanamaker, as saying, well, I know that half my advertising budget is wasted, I just don't know which half. Well, increasingly now that's less and less true with things like digital marketing, whatever else, because you can track it. But still, with some of the activities that we do within our businesses, we're still doing, and we find a lot of business owners are doing a lot of activities in terms of trying to generate leads, and they don't really know which are the ones that are being effective and which aren't. So this is a way to start to get a little bit of discipline into that side of things, and then being able to track which ones work and which ones don't. So really, that's pretty much all that I wanted to say on that side of things. So that's just that quick recap really here in terms of what we were looking at overall. The cookbook comes in as part of a marketing plan or a lead generation plan, however you want to call it. But ideally, that should include a value proposition, some kind of framework to identify the activities that you want to do, the lead generation framework, picking some of those, not all of them, but picking some of the ones that need a little bit more detail behind them and making them into a process, really mapping it out and deciding what needs to be done, and then putting together a cookbook that we've just gone through today, so that you've got those behaviours that you can monitor people on and monitor yourself on, see whether things are working or not. And the next step would be then to translate those into any budgets, so that if any do have costs attached to them, that we can set a budget ahead of time, so we set it for the year, that's what we're prepared to spend on these activities, but link that budget back to whether it's actually being effective or not, so that if we get partway through the year and we either find things that are working really, really well, much better than we thought, we can maybe spend a bit more money and a bit more time in doing those kind of things a bit more. But obviously, if we find things aren't working quite as well, this cookbook, monitoring the KPIs, should help us to then go, okay, well, why is it not working? Is it because it's just the wrong thing to do and therefore it's not going to work anyway? Or is it because we're not actually doing the behaviours that we should be doing, or we're not doing some of the specific things within those well enough? So, for example, if you have a difficulty from, say, when you've sent out a letter to actually getting people to talk to you on the phone, maybe the letter is not written in the way that it could do. Or if you have difficulty converting from the telephone, in the example I did earlier, in terms of telephone conversation, to try and get to a face-to-face meeting, and we're not getting a number of face-to-face meetings that we thought would be good, is it because we're not communicating in the right way in that telephone call? So maybe we need to look at how we go about doing that. So that's basically it. As I say, next time around, maybe what we'll do is we'll look at the marketing budget side of things, for those of you that like to look at your numbers even more. All right, thanks so much, Caroline.
Brilliant, thank you very much. You've got a question waiting for you already. It's from Nicola, and she asks, can this cookbook be applied to anything other than marketing?
Okay, what a great question. Clearly, the way that I put it here, it's definitely focused on the marketing side, with identifying new and existing customers and the targeted and the hunting and the farming activities. But the idea of having a cookbook can apply to any role. So you might not do it in exactly the same way, but the idea of identifying within that role, what are the behaviours that we want to do each month, that we do consistently, and what are the key performance indicators, both the leading and the lagging KPI. So you could just do a slightly different version of the framework, but follow the same kind of principles, and it would apply to pretty much any role that you wanted within the organisation.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I think that's your only question at the moment. But I will be sending out Kevin's contact details out to you all very shortly, so please do email him direct if you have any further questions. So thank you again for hosting today's webinar. But before we close, just a quick reminder, if you would like to keep up to date on our latest webinars, please make sure you follow us on SlideShare or subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also access all of our resources for business owners by downloading our BizSmart app. That's the end of today's BizSmart webinar. Thank you all for listening, and we hope you can join us again very soon.